Yes, absolutely. And welcome everyone. I'm so pleased to hear that the trustees of the Vancouver School District are so curious and interested in learning more about giftedness and talent development. And I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. I'm the former chair of the Gifted Children's Association here in BC, where I have met and worked with many other people on the panel tonight. So it's very lovely to see everyone again and work with everyone again. On the panel tonight, we have Virginia Bowden, who is new to me, and I look forward to get to know you a little bit, former VSB MACC teacher and a developer of gifted seminars. We have Dr. Lanikanebski, who is an associate professor at the Faculty of Education at SFU. We have Dr. Owen, who is an associate professor at the Department of Educational and Counselling Psychology and Special Ed at UBC. And both Dr. Kanevsky and Owen are academic researchers on giftedness education. So we're very fortunate to have two so leading researchers in BC. And so I'm so pleased to welcome you here tonight. We also have my superhero, Maureen McDermid, who's been the light in our lives and in many other gifted families' lives, who's been a director at Choice School and I think maybe still is involved, and who has long experience working with gifted children as a teacher and also as a director at Choice School. And then Dr. Joan Pincus, who is, probably the most busy psychologist doing psych eds of gifted kids here in British Columbia, is going to join us a little bit later from LAX, where she just landed. So she may come in later in the discussion. But with that, I would like to say also to the parents who are on this meeting tonight, as a parent, I have two boys at Hamburg right now. We never went the MACC route. It wasn't for us, but we did end up at Choice School. And I know that feeling of that, coming to a program like MACC almost being sacred after not feeling safe in the school system for a few years. So I understand the emotions and the height of the emotions for, seeing a program like MACC, which is working well, to be canceled. So I'm mindful of that, having the discussion tonight. But I'm also going to leave space for the trustees to learn more about giftedness and have a discussion where we can have sort of a constructive and open discussion and respectful discussion about that. But with that, I want to leave the word to our lovely panel, who get 15 seconds to say something about themselves and also maybe set an intent for tonight, what you really want to, what you had the most important point you would like to get across to the trustees. So if we start with Dr. Lanikanebski, what would you say?
All that in 15 seconds, and you want an academic to do that? No, it's not going to happen. Let's see, I have been at SFU as a faculty member for 30 years. Gifted education and gifted learners have always been the focus of my research. I was a classroom teacher in Coquitlam and still consider myself first and foremost to be a classroom teacher, very heavily educated classroom teacher. Still pursuing questions about bright kids and their learning. I have spent time in a couple of the MACC classrooms. They were my place to go when I needed to get my dose of bright kids.
And what is your intent for tonight? What is that? Are you going to come back to that question later on, or?
My intent for tonight is to do my best to represent, speak on behalf of the kids. And that's always been, student voices have been the focus of my research most recently. So
yeah, thank you. And with that, I turn over the word to Dr. Owen.
So hello everyone, my name is Owen. I've been studying gifted education since undergraduate. So I originally coming from Taiwan and also have 7 years of teaching experience and also 2 years of mandatory military. All right, so and then I got my PhD in gifted education at UBC. What I really want to do today is actually to provide some fresh thoughts on inclusion. I know inclusion has been a big direction within the BC curriculum, also within VSB. But then within that discourse, I think we have less discussion on how do we include gifted students in the classrooms and also in the school board. And I don't think we are being led by too many experts in this regard. So today I'm hoping that I can contribute my 2 cents in how to help students in inclusive environments.
Thank you, Owen. That's a great introduction. Virginia Bowden, would you like to say a few words about yourself and your intent for tonight?
So I just found out about this. I'm actually borrowing equipment here. I'm in a ski lodge and all I had was my phone. And I said I want to be part of this. So that's why I'm having few technical problems because I haven't seen this computer before. But I felt it was really important to be here as an advocate for gifted education. I've been involved with it for a number of years. First as a parent of a gifted child, then I worked at Troy School, familiar with that background. And then I taught the MACC classes, grades 4, 5, and also grade 6, 7 for a number of years. And then I created and implemented the seminar program for gifted enrichment. So I feel I've got a bit of experience in that area and some insights. And I guess the main reason I'm here is to really emphasize that these students need the MACC program. There's nothing quite like it that can replace it. It's unique and it's very important in their lives.
Thank you. We'll come back to that a little bit later in the evening, but thank you for your introduction. I would also like to have a few words from Maureen McDermott. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be here with you. I'm going to bring you the longitudinal view. That is my intent. I was in the late 50s, one of the children that was invited into a experimental gifted program offered in Richmond School District. This was in response to let's find our brightest and best because Russia, and we've all heard a lot about that recently, put Sputnik up, and we needed to use these brains, apparently. I married a gifted man. I didn't quite know that at the beginning, but it's become apparent. We have twins, boys, who are highly gifted, and they've given us 5 grandchildren, all of whom are gifted. I've worked with kids and parents my entire career, and my predisposition is to support those students that have the attributes of giftedness and to assist their parents in understanding what that takes, because it's a tough job, and my colleagues to recognize those students and meet their needs.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I think we always like to have that longitudinal sharing, and I think especially because we who have worked in the GCABC know how much it has gone up and down for giftedness in BC over the decades, and so I look forward to hear that more about that tonight from you, Maureen. I don't know, do we have Joan Pincus on the call yet? She said she would come in at 7:15. Otherwise, we may have to return to her in a little bit. But with that, I would like to probably open the discussion. And so Joan, I'll put a text message in the chat that she can just let us know when she's here. And then we'll do a brief introduction of her as well, so that all of you will understand who she is as well. I will start with the first question. What does it mean to be gifted? So maybe I will just start by handing out the word to Dr. Owen Lowe, since you work with gifted education.
All right, Lannie too, and so this is really a very broad question. It would take probably a whole term to explain what is giftedness. In a nutshell, what I want to say is that, first of all, I'm not a huge proponent of using the label. I do feel the need of having a label, so you get appropriate educational services. But the label itself is a double-edged sword. It would be hard for the kid to carry for a lifetime. And so I prefer to call them student with ALD, student with advanced learning needs. And that's the label I'm trying to propose these days. And so this is also a very contextual concept. Who are students with ALP, advanced learning needs, ALN? These are the students who are in a given place, in a given time, who demonstrate much higher learning needs than the peers. And those needs cannot be fulfilled in a regular classroom. If I may, can I show a slide? So, one of the basic comments that we talked about, giftedness, quite very often is talking about IQ. Right? Many of you probably know the regular cutoff line for giftedness would be IQ 130. And some of you might have a more advanced knowledge on stats. So you will know IQ 130 means standard two standard deviations and above. One standard deviation is 15 point. So that would be 100 plus 2 times 15. So that would be 100. But then that's a very abstract way of understanding intelligence. And so usually in my class, I would put them in 3 columns to help my students understand what does it mean by having such a high IQ. All right. So let's take 130 for example. As if we are taking a student at the cutoff line, IQ 130. So first of all, from the bell curve point of view, that means 2 standard deviation above. So that stands somewhere around top 2%, top 3% of the population. So if I'm telling you this student is the top 2% of the student body, your impression would be, oh, he's a smart kid and nothing else. It doesn't really give you any insight. So there's another way of seeing IQ 130 in terms of variety. So that means every one student in 45 students, there will be a student have an IQ, achieving that level. So it means in roughly 100 students, there will be 2 of them having this level. So if I'm telling you this insight, you might have a reference. Oh, so that means, it's very intelligent and in comparison to like a body of students. But that's still abstract. It doesn't really give you the educational needs, right? You were telling me, so what about the advanced learning needs? So the original idea of IQ and the calculation is mental age divided by your physical age, chronicle age, and times 100. So if we are taking chronicle age at 10, roughly grade 4 or 5 as example, IQ 130 means this student have a mental age of 13. So that means this student have a mental capacity of receiving information that 3 years above of the peers. So if I'm giving you this information, then you probably can understand is it possible for a teacher to fulfill that needs in a regular inclusive classroom. I'm only using the cutoff line 130, right? So if you're talking about IQ 160, that means that would be 6th grade above in the regular classroom. So if a teacher in a regular classroom only have 1 student with special needs, I think this is manageable. You still might find a way to fulfill the needs. But if you're a teacher in the classroom, especially in BC, that you're dealing with multiple languages, EL, dealing with disabilities, autism, learning disabilities in the classroom, and then also included and get a student with very high IQ in the classroom. I think that would really challenge the teacher's capacity of fulfilling the needs of all students who require special learning needs in the classrooms. So this is the insight coming from the point of IQ. However, the way that I see giftedness is way beyond an IQ. What I see as giftedness is that I believe every student have their own talents and gifts that have to be discovered by teachers and by parents. And the educational system should provide.
So can we go over to that as a discussion? And I was curious maybe about some of the other panelists weighing in on because I think this is an excellent introduction to show that gifted isn't gifted. Gifted can mean so many different things. And I say this as a mom to 2 boys who are gifted in the visual spatial area, which is where you present totally different than if you are sort of more the logical critical thinker, right? So maybe Dr. Kanevsky can come on and talk a little bit about how these children can present in a regular classroom first, and what sets MACC apart so much, because obviously that is the big question tonight, what MACC has meant in the school district. And maybe just go back to your personal experiences of teaching both in the regular classroom and in a MACC, or being in a MACC classroom. So Dr. Kanevsky, you're on mute, so if you could share a few comments. Yeah.
Okay. In some ways, I might be picking up where Dr. Lowe left off, the notion of gifted students being much more than an IQ score. And that's certainly where the current research has pointed us. unfortunately, like most areas of research, we don't have consensus on a definition, a generally accepted definition of giftedness. However, we do know a good bit about what these students look and feel like in the classroom. One thing is certain, they're heterogeneous. They do not fall into a particular bucket. They don't make themselves easy to find. Some of the more outspoken, or as you can see in this list of attributes, expressive students are quite articulate and have these outstanding memories and appetites for learning. They're the easy ones to find. It's the students who are more reserved, perhaps new to Canada, English is a second language for them, or maybe a third or a fifth, depending on their backgrounds. But they have a spark. There's something about them that a teacher, regardless of the area of the student's abilities, there's a spark there. There's a light in their eye, and there's an intensity. And it's this intensity that can be both a blessing and a curse in the regular classroom. It's a blessing when you happen to be doing something with them, offering them an activity or an experience that is a good match, or what we call an optimal match in the research, with their areas of abilities and preferred ways of learning. When that intensity is being directed at being perhaps not as kind to their classmates as they would like to be, they can be quite vicious. So there's a dark side to this ability when it's not appropriately invested in learning activities that are matched to their abilities. I think that a number of the parents and others who've spent some time looking at more contemporary definitions of giftedness, even though this one was stated in 1991, it still resonates for a lot of people, leaders in the field who are interested in the more emotional and social sides of giftedness. And they define it as asynchronous development, which I think is a pretty intuitive term. And what it means is their intellectual ability, the development of their intellectual abilities is out of sync with other areas of development. And Lena, you mentioned visual spatial. It can also be physical, social, emotional. So you've got this huge brain and no ability to manage their impulses or be sensitive to anybody else around them. And so this kind of stereotypical notion of the gifted child being a gift to have in your classroom can become quite challenging. So just in closing, I'll say, I tend to think of the range of gifted kids not as a continuum, but as a constellation. And we do have research that demonstrates that as you move up the IQ scale that Dr. Lowe was talking about, as you get into the higher regions, the scatter among the kids with those scores in terms of their development in these other areas becomes broader. So I'd like to introduce the idea of kind of a three-dimensional sense of their scatter rather than a linear continuum, because it's things like IQ are distributed along a continuum. Things like kids are not. They have much more complexity to them.
Thank you. I think that's all of those are very good points. Virginia, I'm going to ask you in a minute to talk a little bit about the MACC classroom, since you have experience teaching. And, just since I have worked with medical science and done a lot of research in a different field, I find when I came into this area, I just want to emphasize that giftedness has a physiological cost. It's not a construction. It is a hyperwired brain, where synapses are, moving, everything is moving faster. And that's where that intensity comes from. We are they are neurodiverse. Some of them have other conditions too, like autism, ADHD. A lot of them are anxious, which I think is connected to that hyperwiring that their brains have. So it's not something that we can maybe at least today measure with imaging techniques in the medical sciences. We see these things. We see that their brains are different. We can also measure a lot of the speed, the processing speed, and sometimes the processing speed can be the same as for average kid or other kids. But I think it's also important to point out that the medical sciences now are doing a lot of research showing how they are different and where this intensity comes from, not only in academic ability, but also the social emotional aspects, which I think are very important to highlight. That's what got our family lost in the Vancouver school system, and that's why we had to go to choice and sort of reframe everything and come back and put our one son together at least again. And I can see that that's where all this anger and fear is coming from in the MACC community, even though I'm not a member of that, because that was very similar to our experience. So with that, I would just like to let Virginia speak a little bit about her experiences as a teacher in the MACC system or in the MACC program, and say why it works so well for gifted students.
Okay, thank you. I won't go into the details too much on how the MACC class is structured, because I'm presuming that we're fairly familiar with that. But I think one of the main points is the social and emotional security that it provides to children. I overheard one student say, "They get my jokes." I know that sounds a little trivial, but it isn't, because all of a sudden now they can communicate, someone understands them, they can have someone to discuss current event topics or whatever they're interested in, and they don't feel so much like they're an outsider. And so what happens is, in some ways, the stress level goes down. So a student that might feel kind of anxious in a regular classroom, or they don't feel that they fit in, the idea that they have found a place where they feel like they belong and they connect, it really does, it frees them up. It allows them to excel. And I think that's really important with the MACC program. Is one is the social emotional, and the other one is feeling okay about, they don't feel like they're showing off, because that sometimes happens in the regular classroom. They're afraid to put up their hand. They're afraid to know too much. The teacher gets tired of hearing from them. And I found in the MACC class, they're encouraged to do that. They have that opportunity to not have to hide a part of themselves. So I think that is a very important component of the MACC program, is that they feel like they belong, they feel like they can connect with someone, and they also feel like they can go at their own pace.
Those are excellent points, and I think that's obviously the experience at the independent schools as well, that them being a safe haven after many years of struggling socially and emotionally in the regular school system, it becomes very important. But Virginia, I know you said you didn't want to go into the structuring of the MACC program, but for some people in the room, they don't know how the MACC program is structured. So I wonder if you could maybe just talk a little bit about the academic side of MACC and how the classes are built up and what the philosophy around the program is, obviously without going too much into detail, but.
Okay, I should say it's been, I am retired, so it's been a few years since I've been in the MACC classroom, but I think it's fundamentally the same. A lot of it's based, it's problem-based learning, for those of you who are familiar with Sheila Gallagher's work. And so the students are often given challenges. They can design some of their own curriculum. They have larger projects, like we do Evening of Eminence. They plan their own math program. So it's not you'll have a classroom, excuse me, where everyone's doing a different page of math or a different activity. And so that's very motivating for them to do that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I think also, Maureen, I don't know if you would mind coming on and talking a little bit about the differences between the MACC program and, for example, what you do at Choice. Is it similar, would you say, academically? But since we are talking about the needs of gifted and multi-exceptional kids, what I understand is that there are not that many other, there are some students in the MACC programs who have disabilities and learning differences, but Choice is obviously more set up for that as a special education school in the independent system. But would you, since we're talking more in general ways about the gifted ed and the structuring of academic programs, would you mind just sharing how, for example, Choice is similar and how it's different?
Well, that's a little bit of a stretch for me because I have never been invited into a MACC class. So,
it sounds like you can talk about Choice, though. I know.
However, when I listen to Virginia, and this is not the first time I've listened to her talk about what happens in the MACC classes, what I can tell you is that because we base what we're doing, how we're supporting the children, by the understandings that we are uncovering here about what makes them different. When you base it like that, then similar things must be going on. So Lannie talked about intensity. It's the top of my list. These kids are intense. The other thing is that they're curious. So you have to be prepared to structure an environment for their learning where they can be curious and follow that curiosity until they're satisfied with it. They have passions. They're areas of interest that they already have developed quite deeply or with a lot of breadth. And so you need to be able to accommodate their passions and give them the opportunity to explore those. They're often uncertain, and the other side of that, they're often very confident. So that's part of the social emotional support that they need. But you have to be prepared that, you know, just because the child is gifted doesn't mean they just zoom ahead and take everything and make it work and away they go, because that's just not the case. They're often bored. So if you're in any kind of class with a bunch of gifted kids or even one, you need to be checking in with that a lot. Because they don't have a lot of patience for being bored. Their minds are active, as you spoke about, Lena, and they need that stimulation going. So it has to be active and targeted to their interests, but also to build that community that they're learning in. They definitely have well-defined preferred and non-preferred tasks. So you have to be nimble when you're in the classroom with these kids, because whether it's a preferred task or a non-preferred task, it is a task and it's there for a purpose. Yeah. So you have to find.
So we have, sorry, we have an excellent question in the chat, and I would like to get to that in a moment. I just see that Joan Pincus has joined us, so I would like, Joan, if you can come off mute and just introduce yourself. And maybe talk just a little bit about to what it would do to a gifted learner to be in the classroom without that support, and maybe since you do the psychosocial educational assessments, talk a little bit about what differences do we see, like when they come in at an elementary level, how far beyond can they be in ability, and what does it do to them in the classroom when they can't, when they get, for example, as we've seen in VSB, where it seems sometimes that people think that you can accelerate them 2 years and that's good. But how many years do you need to accelerate, for example, and what does it do to their mental health?
Those were a lot of questions. Hi, everyone. I'm Joan Pincus. Sorry that I'm late. Never mind. I'm a psychologist. I've seen a lot of kids for many years, and it's just been a wonderful experience. To see these kids, to be able to assess skills, strengths, abilities, weaknesses, as Maureen was just saying when I came on about the need for stimulation, the seeking of high stimulation, being excited about something, having a passion, being able to follow it and not be told you have 10 minutes to work on this and then you have to move on to something else. And that something else is often a task that they would perceive as more mundane. And then we end up with a number of reactive behaviors, sometimes identified as oppositional, sometimes identified as defiant, sometimes identified as just being non-cooperative, when what we're really looking at is not understanding what the child's needs are. So, you know, in my experience, being able to provide opportunities for that child to learn at his or her natural pace of learning is what's so important in education. And if we do look at research that talks about supporting gifted learners in the regular classroom or supporting gifted learners in specialized classrooms, that's where we see they thrive the most. And when we speak to gifted learners, this is like for years about what excites you the most about your learning. It's often being able to be with others who also get excited about learning, have the support of the parents, and have teachers who are keen to teach me about areas that I'm keen to learn about. And by having teachers be really needing to be that much more diverse and meeting the needs of many different children in the classroom, the gifted child is often the one who's not identified. The gifted child is often the one who's asked to teach the other kids. You've done this really well. You understand this socials. Why don't you teach so-and-so? You're really good at the math. Can you teach so-and-so? Now that creates a real discomfort for a lot of gifted learners because they're not getting their needs met necessarily, but they're being set up as the person who can teach those who are less able. And then that creates negative psychosocial relationships. And that creates for them a sense that their peers don't accept them. So I feel it's been really important for the kids I've seen to be in programs as much as they can, where they're given the opportunities to be enriched, sometimes to be accelerated, sometimes to be accelerated in certain areas, but not in others. But as choice does, to be able to move at their own pace, but generally still with age peers. So when we look at what does a gifted child need, we have three different areas that we often talk about, and that's time with other kids who are of the same intellectual level, time with other kids who are of the same age level, and then also time alone to be creative, to think. And if we can have the intellectual age child and the chronological age child be the same child, then we're creating many more opportunities for emotional, psychological, academic success. So I don't know if I touched on a couple of those areas, Lena, that you were mentioning.
I think you did. Yeah, I think okay. Yeah, no, I think what we've talked about this far, we're 42 minutes into this hour, and I'm just mindful about the time. This discussion was supposed to go on to 8 o'clock. I understand we can go maybe a little bit longer, but and we have a few other themes we need to talk about, such as the cancellation of MACC and what that means to with the suggested replacement, which I understand is a type of enrichment model for where more students can access it, but it's for a shorter duration at another school. So I was wondering, maybe if we can let that question, if we just focus on the newly proposed program that we don't know much about. We don't know how students are being selected. We don't know if they have to be gifted. I think that's maybe one of the things. You don't have to be gifted, but it's maybe called the gifted program. There are a lot of question marks around this new proposed model. And so, for example, I don't know if one of Dr. Lowe or Dr. Kanevsky, Dr. Lowe, I see you're off mute. Maybe you want to say a few things about this.
All right, so I do have a lot to say about the new proposal. First of all, I'm happy to hear, I'm happy to see that they are opening up more opportunity for students, right? So we, in general, everyone, every parent in the school board want to have a more gifted education in the school board, right? In a way, education that's gifted will include more students. So that's a good thing. However, talking about the ultra advanced learning needs and talking about the program design, I don't think that's evidence-based, even though the school board was trying to claim that the design was evidence-based. Given my past 20 years of studies, I've never seen any proposal saying that a 6-week pull-out program is the perfect duration. As we all know, it has to be contextualized, right? Depending on what the school system is, how long is the term and so on, what's the best transition for student going back and going into the regular classroom. What if the student have, twice exceptionality, a student who is gifted, but also, has autism? How can the student fit into the change of the schedules? That would be very inconsiderate for a student, who had twice exceptionality. And second of all, talking about the program design, the proposal itself didn't really talk about how the student would be selected or how the student would be screened. It only says any student who want to volunteer, who want to, enroll to the program, they can enroll. This is a good strategy in itself. It encourages more students to be, motivated and trying to be a high achiever. So in a way, that's a good thing. But if you really want to deal with equity issues, that's very passive aggressive, or you are actually not doing anything. In many other school boards, the way they tackle with equity issue in the identification procedure is that they use universal consideration. And that means you actually are going to forgo parental, the parental referrals, and also forgo the teacher referrals, because human beings are machines, right? So we have our biases. So it's really hard for a teacher to have a neutral mind to select who are the best mind in classroom and refer the students. So in many other school districts, they use universal screen, and then they have independent center trying to review all students' profile and trying to identify who has true potential and that was covered, that was missed in the classroom. And say a student coming from First Nation, who doesn't have, one of the First Nation tribes, and who doesn't have an equal educational resource. So the potential has been dulled in the past, say, 6-7 years, and never been considered as gifted, but truly is a diamond in the rough. So a student like that in the classroom wouldn't have the self-advocacy to say, I want to volunteer to that, to the challenge center. The student might be coming into a, with less confidence. And the teacher wouldn't also discover the student as diamond in the rough. It's too hard to tell that way unless you do a lot of intervention, you give a lot of motivational traits to the students. So the best way to discover these students who might suffer from equity issue are universal consideration, that you do screening, and then you have independent center trying to sift out who are the students in needs.
Thank you, Dr. Lowe. That's excellent. Virginia, did you have a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to add to that. Some of the school districts do the universal screening. I believe Coquitlam does at grade 3. And Vancouver, we also did some screening at the Brock School. But the thing, the issue with inviting parents to bring their students to be, or their children to be tested, not everyone can do that. Not everybody can take time off work in the middle of the day to take their child to a center, sometimes for 1 or 2 sessions to be tested. So by doing it in the schools, there's everyone has access. And I also think that's quite important, that you're reaching everyone in that way.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent point. Lannie, did you want to comment?
Yes, please. In terms of the universal testing, for those of you who aren't familiar with what we're talking about, what Coquitlam does is every student in grade 3 is given a test of cognitive reasoning, and that's what's referred to. I see the strengths of it in the sense that everybody gets a chance, equal chance on the same measure to be screened. I have some concerns about students who are not great test takers. Somebody mentioned anxiety before, not that comfortable with English. The test they use does come in a number of languages. So the notion of relying on a single measure is worrisome to me and introduces a different kind of a problem. but still, it isn't a perfect assessment, a perfect approach. The special ed policy of manual of policies and procedures does recommend more than one assessment. And in terms of what is recommended, it is multidimensional. In other words, you use more than one, more than two sources. And I think, in terms of finding kids, offering possibilities, so that a child, whatever the child's strength is, maybe they want to submit a portfolio of their best work. Maybe there's actually an interview. I know at the transition program at UBC that it's quite a process. You'd be pretty impressed by some of these little sparks. You tell them that they're going to get to go study a passion, they will really step up and can impress you beyond belief. So don't underestimate, even a 9-year-old, they are outstanding. I think probably my biggest concern about going to the enrichment model that I've seen described, I attended a couple of the engagement meetings in January and February, is the disruption of the transition, the disruption of relationships that they are just developing with their classmates in the enrichment program, and then boom, they're back in their regular classroom again. And some bright kids really struggle with those kinds of transitions, period. Other kids don't. It's water off a duck's back. But I think we need to be aware that some do. I'm also wondering about whether they will be held accountable for whatever was going on in the regular classroom while they were away. And how is that going to be managed? In some of the literature, they talk about two different ways of approaching this. One is that they do what's offered in the enrichment program in addition to the regular classroom, which who's going to choose that? These are smart kids we're talking about. That is not fair. And secondly, the other option is instead of. And yet, how is a regular classroom teacher going to be able to manage the disappearing and reappearing student? If any of you who've taken your child out of school for a holiday or through this pandemic, if they've been away for a while, it is disruptive to the flow of their learning. So it's the in and out business that I feel is problematic. And finally, as just something to think about for the trustees, one of the additional benefits that we haven't talked about with the MACC program is that the kids are enrolled in MACC all the time. They have one classroom. With the gifted enrichment centers, they would be enrolled in two places simultaneously. Therefore, the funding that supports the gifted enrichment centers is in addition to the funding for their regular classrooms. So I'm not sure how that works with Vancouver School Board's budgets, but I think that dollars are also a consideration, and the MACC program does provide students with a home classroom, and they're only enrolled in one place. So in that sense, it's a less expensive alternative. And I'll leave it there.
So I see a natural follow-up question here. I see that VSB sort of describes MACC more as a streaming tracking program rather than a special education program. Choice School Enrichment, for example, has that special education designation as an independent school. And MACC is also, according to at least what I thought, a special educational program, because you have to have the P designation, and the P designation, according to the Ministry of Education, is a special needs. So I don't know who on the panel feels that they want to talk about that a little bit.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
Just quickly, and I will be brief. One of the concerns that I don't think of MACC as a streamed program. I think of it as kind of a highway with on and off ramps, because kids do come in and leave throughout the 4 years of the program, grades 4, 5, 6, and 7. A tract or a stream program, those words are usually used to describe programs where once you're in, it's very difficult to switch tracks. You're in a groove and you may be missing prerequisites or other courses that you need to switch. Whereas my understanding, and having been in the classrooms, I've seen kids come in grade 5 or grade 6 and stay for 6 and 7. Or if, the families choose, the kids go back into their neighborhood schools. So I guess in that way, I wouldn't see it as tracked.
Yeah, I see some questions in the chat that I unfortunately don't think the panel can answer tonight, because we're not representing VSB. I think it's great too that we can maybe save these questions. And I know that GCABC has submitted a number of questions about the new alternative that has been presented to us, because we also don't know the details around that yet. So I see Dr. Pincus want to comment on that.
I just wanted to comment on the difficulties that I think many children will experience, as Lannie was saying, going to and from a program for 6 weeks. It means leaving their peers, going to be with other peers that they may not have a relationship with, then going back to the previous peers who then have other judgments made about them. Where were you? Aren't you special? Why aren't you here? You're no longer part of our peer group. I mean, kids can get, unfortunately, mean and nasty. And so I could see a lot of kids saying, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go and risk the social relationships that I have here to an unknown there. And the other factor becomes, as Lannie also referred to, if we're talking about 720 kids being serviced, that means 720 teachers all agreeing to the same response to the kids being out of the classroom for 6 weeks. And exactly what Lannie was saying, so how are those kids evaluated? How does the teacher write the report card? You missed 6 weeks, you have to make up the 6 weeks of work that you missed, or I can't write your report card. And over the years, we've seen many kids who said, I'm not going to go to a pull-out program where I can be smart on Wednesdays from 9 to 9:30 and then come back and have to do the extra work. So I think there are a lot of psychosocial implications in that kind of 6-week program that isn't going to go over very well with a lot of the kids who otherwise are serviced well when they are with their peers for longer periods of time, where they can develop those longer lasting relationships and where they're given permission to think outside the box. So,
yeah, it's a very good point. I'm going to let Maureen comment, and I just want to say that I'm really concerned about the children with autism who are gifted. They're not going to be able to doing this at all. As we know, with autism, you need predictability, you need to have a routine. They can have skyrocketing IQs that they need extra support and challenge for. But to pull them 6 weeks out of a program, I can speak for a majority of parents there saying that.
Where does the funding go? Where does the funding go?
Yeah, like that's just not thought through, I think. Maureen, what do you want to say?
I'm always amazed that there seems to be a kind of acceptance among the education community that you can be gifted for a certain amount of time and then you have to be normal again or typical. So we would never, for instance, say to a child on the autism spectrum that you only get to be on the autism spectrum 4 or 5 weeks out of the year twice. The rest of the time, you'll just have to get along with whatever's going on for all the rest of the children. This is a little bit of madness. And why this gets visited on gifted children, and I don't like that word any more than anybody else is, but why that gets visited on those children, if we give them this little chunk, it'll carry them over for a while. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I think we're going to transition into talking about equity and inclusive education. It's 8 o'clock, but before we do, I just want to raise one question that I don't see on the suggestions or questions, and that is the National Association of Giftedness in the US that has come out with a different approach where they recommend acceleration enrichment programs for about 10% of the most intellectually advanced students. And by doing that, by making it available to more students, that they can actually make it work at the local school. So you who have worked with giftedness and education around giftedness, what do you think about their recommendation to approach it a different way than to make it for fewer students and thereby raising the whole equity issue? Can I just ask someone, Dr. Lowe, what do you think about that recommendation?
I didn't quite get the question. Could you?
So the National Association of Giftedness in the US have a different approach. They allow, instead of saying that just have special education for the top 2% according to an IQ test, and as we know, that excludes a lot of the multi-exceptional students, because if you have learning disabilities, you will have, some of the peaks, you can be on the 100th percentile of in certain areas, and then you can have very low scores in other areas. So that's going to exclude a lot of the multi-exceptional students. So in the US, they have discussed that maybe a more practical solution would be to make what we call giftedness education now available for the top 10% instead of the top 2.
Right.
What would you?
So again, this really varies, but depending on the budget of the school board, right? Some school board even goes up to 25%. Of course, this is all theory based. When you're talking about 2%, you're following the Terman model. When you're talking about the 10%, you're following the Canadian scholar. Lennie, remind me.
Gagne.
Yeah, Gagne. Right, you are following Gagne's model for 10%. If you are going for 20-25%, you are going for Renzulli's talent pool. So every school board has their own decision to decide what percentage they want to follow, right? It has on its philosophy, but that's also, at the end of the day, it's really depending on how much what's the pocket of money that you can spend in this particular population.
Yes, thank you. That was a good ad. That was just my own personal reflection. I wondered about that. Dr. Kanevsky, do you have a comment on that?
Well, one of my concerns about equity is, if equity is more than the selection criteria or the identification process. And one of the big pieces that the US is wrestling with now, and we are in Canada as well, and that is we need to work harder to convince the families who don't consider themselves worthy of these programs that they are just as entitled to participate in these programs, any of them, and whether it's MACC or enrichment programs. And that's got nothing to do with the criteria. That's got to do with making it feasible for people to actually participate in the selection process. And maybe, in fact, enrichment activities and things like challenge centers can act as part of the selection process instead of being the selection process having to be completed before the kids participate. What if some of the sessions are actually, we provide the challenging curriculum and the experiences that are designed for really high ability learners, high potential kids, and see how they respond to it, because maybe that's where they'll fly. And
I think that I really like that you say that. It's interesting to see how what Harvard is doing now, opening up all their distance education programs, and then everyone can start, and only the ones that can actually do the exam and pass the exam will continue, right? So it's sort of like you throw out a wide net and you see what you catch, right? It's a very interesting idea. I don't know how we could discuss it.
It's not new. The
No.
folks at Columbia University have been doing it in Harlem for years and designing all sorts of options and opportunities to get the kids who are in very low income areas who never ever believed that they would go to university. And here they are 7 years old at Columbia University, sitting in a lecture hall, listening to a lecture on mathematics. And we need to do some work to really deconstruct kids and families' beliefs about what's possible.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
I'll add more. So what I feel problematic in the process is that the cancellation of MACC and the addition of the enrichment center in name of equity. However, the equity issue is not really being addressed in the whole process. First of all, if there's an equity issue in identification, then what's the evidence based? Is it intuitive? Is that anecdotal? If you don't provide any survey, any evidence to support the argument, then that's anecdotal. So the cancellation wouldn't have a justification, justified foundation. With evidence, we probably know, we have a sense that it's an equity issue. So what are the equity issues, and how the identification process can improve those equity issues? So none of those have ever been discussed by the school board yet.
Yeah, and just to add to what Dr. Lowe is saying, so at the GCABC, we're now in the process of planning a survey where we're actually trying to probe this idea that it's only sort of white affluent people that access giftedness programs. We don't actually know if that's true. I don't think we've ever seen any statistics on that. Living in Vancouver, that is such a unique place, and only using all that research from giftedness studies in the US, which they have their own problems. And as a Swede and as a new Canadian, I find it so interesting that Canadians compare themselves to the US when the societal structure is so different. And also when it comes to public education. Sweden was the first on the bandwagon when it came to inclusive education. We've had it for 15 years. And it has had very unexpected consequences in Sweden, where we had a one-track system it started in 2006. In 2008, I think we were the country in the world, except Italy, had maybe less schools of different types. We have one model fits all. And as a consequence, it's opened up for charter schools in Sweden, not because the special education parents are unhappy. It doesn't seem to work completely for the kids with special needs. But the other parents have pulled out, because an inclusive classroom, as nice as it may be seen, can be quite difficult to manage for one or two teachers, especially with the combinations of autism, ADHD, dyslexia, giftedness. We put all of that in one classroom and put it on the teacher to accommodate that. The other parents, at least the Swedish experience has been that the other parents don't have their kids there always. So I don't know if one of the panel can maybe talk to a little bit about what does inclusion and inclusive classroom in British Columbia mean for a gifted student?
Well, I would just like to say that I don't know if I'm going to answer that directly, but it's very difficult. And I can't get my head around expecting one teacher to meet the needs of all the students in that classroom. Already we have that, trying to fit everyone into the average part of the normal distribution. But if we take our gifted learners and they're away for 6 weeks, then they come back and then they're back in the class, and the teacher is supposed to meet the needs of all those children. One of my colleagues and I were discussing this, and she said, well, it's like someone going to a restaurant and the chef says, I can cook anything. If you're gluten, if you need a gluten-free, if you're lactose intolerant, if you're nut allergic, don't worry, I can handle it all. I can only handle it though for half an hour. The rest of the time you have to choose from the regular menu. And by the way, I've had no special courses in nut allergy cooking or gluten-free cooking or lactose intolerance cooking, but I'll do my best to try and make a hodgepodge for you. So I just can't understand how that teacher is going to be able to meet the needs of all of these children, particularly those who leave and then come back, might leave and then come back. So I have real concerns about how that child is going to fit in and whether or not that teacher is actually going to be able to meet that child's needs.
So Maureen has her hand up. You're very disciplined, Maureen. What do you have?
I do lots of these Zoom calls. It comes with experience. I want to speak a little bit, if I may, about this notion of inclusion. It originated because at one point we had a lot of special needs classes, and it was viewed as a way to cluster children and to meet the particular special needs they had. It soon became evident to educators that this was separating kids from participating in the rich life of a school that has lots of diversity, and recognize that, you know, this was probably not the best answer. The distinction that I make around inclusion for gifted kids is that we were moving kids who had learning challenges into a more representative, heterogeneous learning experience that represents the world and the community outside. And that's a good thing. However, if you are so unique in terms of your intellect and the way you are as a person, your intensity, your curiosity, your passions, then inclusion for you means being able to be with people who understand and can share those kinds of really important and intense needs that you have. So I raise the question, what does inclusion mean for children that are gifted? Which is different, I would suggest, than inclusion that is looking to move us, those that have been excluded, into the community, the family of learning.
So I think Virginia was, I don't know, was Virginia first and then Dr. Kanevsky? Yeah. Oh, Lannie, you start.
Okay, I had wanted to say this, and then Scott Jackson asked this question in the chat, and it's regarding the 2016 redesigned curriculum in BC. And I think that relates to the question of inclusion and gets to one of the bigger concerns I have. If you dismantle the MACC program and all these kids are going back into regular classrooms, whether or not the gifted enrichment centers exist, the intensity of these kids' learning needs is different from your mildly gifted kids. The kids, my experience of the kids in the MACC program was that they were intensely gifted, and they were not your run-of-the-mill bright kid. And so to Maureen's point, I think that it does place additional challenges on the regular classroom teacher to try and understand and address their learning needs in the regular classroom. The 2016 curriculum, when I saw it come out, I can't tell you how excited I was. I was, telling all of my researchy friends globally what a panacea this was, with personalized learning experience and promoting student agency. And as the kids go through school years, they are becoming more and more autonomous because their assignments are going to become will involve more and more student agency. And I was then quite dismayed when I heard from the ministry that there would be no professional development support to help teachers transition into all of the wonderfulness of the 2016 curriculum. And so it's been left to the districts to offer workshops. And the majority of those workshops that I'm aware of, and I'm not saying that I have the pulse of the whole province, but they seem to be focusing on universal designs for learning. And that's universal. And these kids are way out on the extreme end of the continuum. And UDL, Universal Design for Learning, the supports that teachers are offered for how to do that when it comes to a gifted kid are very thin. And I'll leave it at that. But I think, yes, the curriculum has enormous potential, but teachers are going to need additional opportunities to learn how to work with that potential in a regular classroom with everybody in there. And this is just leading up to, this is one of the reasons I would like to see MACC maintained. And yes, you know, if there's a need for additional enrichment opportunities, I'm a big fan of accessibility, and I want to see as many options for kids as possible. I think that the MACC program is a great option for the kids for whom it works well. The assumption that those kids will also jump at the gifted enrichment centers, I think you might want to ask the kids and their families about that. And for the time that the kids are in the regular classroom, I think there needs to be serious consideration given to the professional development needs of every elementary school, every teacher in grade 4 to 7 who's going to be having kids coming and going. How are they going to keep their wits about them, as well as addressing the needs of the kids when they're there?
Just a quick question before I let Virginia speak. How much time do teachers study giftedness in their basic training?
Oh, ouch. It's optional
It has to
at
be addressed.
SFU. Yeah.
Well, I guess, you know, in total, people usually have 3 hours. So one of the required course is on special ed. And then within the special ed course, there will be one exposure. Usually half of the lecture will be exposed into giftedness. So in my fair, you know, in my fair evaluation, I don't think that's fair for a teacher to have 3 hours of knowledge on giftedness and then to handle all the special needs in the classroom.
So basically, we have almost reached half of the time tonight of what teacher in training will have about giftedness. So just to give you a feel for what you know and how we haven't even really got into the educational practicalities of how you do that. So, and then the same goes for autism, dyslexia, and ADHD, right? Like there's only like a very little time on each. So the inclusive classroom is going to be a big challenge for a lot of people. So Virginia, what did you have to add to the discussion?
That was a while ago. I've sort of been mesmerized by the comments and what people have said and what somebody said half an hour ago. I'm trying to jump in here, but I just wanted to emphasize a few things and talking about this idea, if I can go back a little bit, about the students coming in for 6 weeks and leaving. I started in the MACC, and then I also did all the MACC intake, and that combined a number of things. I just want to point out, we did the testing. It was also teacher input. Originally, it used to be 3 days of seeing the kids. And there were a lot of kids that didn't get into the program that I also felt that needed it, and there was no space. So that was why I started this other like extended gifted, where I would see the kids for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, but it was different in that I could not imagine them coming to see me for one block of time. It was hard enough for those students just to leave their classroom for 1 day a week. And I would even stagger it so they wouldn't be leaving the classroom on the same day, because they could not afford to miss, you know, if they had French on Fridays, well, they couldn't come every Friday because they can't miss all the French classes. And I would see, especially if you have gifted kids that are, let's say, really good students, they don't want to miss their school. They don't want to get behind. And so it's a source of anxiety for them. And I heard someone say about, you know, peer groups, you know, for some of them, it's hard. They're torn what to do. And I continued my program because I felt like they needed, even though it was 1 day a week, they needed to feel like they were they belonged and they were part of a group. And for some of those kids, it helped them get through school. You know, I know. I mean, yes, they're gifted all the time, but just to meet and connect, it helped them survive. And transition is really difficult, you know, and especially kids that perhaps on the spectrum, you know, the idea that they would leave and for 6 weeks and come back. Well, what happens when they come back? What happens when there aren't quite as many bells and whistles in their regular classroom? I would think there might even be greater disappointment, you know, because they had this and now they don't, you know.
We have a comment. We have an add-on comment from Maureen, I think.
Yeah.
So it isn't my intention to tell the school board, Richmond or the Vancouver School Board, what they need to do or how they need to do that. They are elected by their community to make these decisions. But I can tell you about the children that I teach and have worked with over the years. Today, we recognize that some of these children have, and we refer to them as twice exceptional. And twice exceptional children do not, no matter what that second exceptionality is, do not make transitions well. Mm-hmm. They already, because they are such complex individuals, experience high levels of anxiety just about managing themselves every day and getting along in the classroom. To make a move to something that is chopped up into 4 to 6 week sections will virtually eliminate every twice exceptional child, every child with that profile from participating. It will just not work for them.
I think we're getting closer towards the end of this session. We're just in a moment, we're going to open the floor for questions from the trustees. I just want to have one final question that was on the agenda that some people have asked me to ask in the chat, and that is the resource background, or sorry, the research background, which, you know, obviously finished made this decision to cancel the MACC program. So I actually haven't seen, I saw some of the studies being presented to me yesterday. I haven't had time to go through the list of research. I'm curious about if anyone on the panel has had time to go through this conclusive research that shows that inclusive education works for gifted students, which I think maybe was the point. And I'm also interested in seeing in that reference list if there was a Dutch PhD thesis that came out just 2 or 3 years ago, especially on inclusive education and giftedness, showing it didn't work. So I was just curious whether that was actually included in the list. So can someone talk to that? And then we'll move on to the trustees' questions.
I can speak some to it. I guess Lannie can do that too. So some of the research, I have to say, I'm in the field for more than 20 years. I've never been exposed to some of the authors' names. So for me, that's not a credible source if I don't know the name of the authors. And second of all, I don't find any of the scholars in our field addressing equity issues are being, their work is being cited or addressed in the documents. For example, Dr. Scott Peters, for example, Dr. Jonathan Plucker. There are quite a few really famous scholars who has been working on improving the equity issues within gifted education for decades. And that has also been an emergent topic within the field of gifted education. We know there's an equity issue, and then we have been working very hard to improve the location of access and so on. But none of those work were being cited in the documents.
You're interested. I mean, as a trained researcher, I find them very interesting because, you know, there are rules for how you summarize research. Right. And I mean, to me, it's almost like I draw a parallel to anti-vax theories where you have a set theory and then you try to prove it with very selective research. So, you know, it's I hope that's not the case. I hope there are other reasons why there are not significant studies in that list. I haven't seen it myself, so I can't go into great detail on that. But from a GCABC perspective, I can promise you that once we get that list, and I don't think we've seen the full list yet, we're going to go through it with, in detail and come up with a conclusion and translate what every study actually shows. Because I think when we do advocacy on behalf of our own children, it's very important to understand why decisions are being made, and so we can understand them and support them. So I think with that, we're going to move over to the questions of the trustees. I don't know how they're going to be shared. I don't know if one of the other people who are organizing can help me with that, or if they are just being put in the chat, maybe. I'm just going to say that some of the questions, just to repeat again, that some of the questions seem to be addressing VSB more than us here on the panel tonight. We can't we don't have the information that you're asking for, but as a representative of the GCABC, and we have Dr. Lowe and Maureen is a former director as well. We're going to put that information, we're going to save the chat and make sure that when we also have our questions as a community organization, that we will follow up with that. Having said that, I also want to highlight that GCABC is a community partner in this. We have the experience, we have experts. We want to build bridges and partnerships and support the school district when they're going through these transitional changes. I'm also want to highlight to the trustees that to look at other countries, look at Sweden, for example, and see what has happened in other countries when there is a huge shift in the educational model. It can have consequences that you don't expect. And as a parent for many years, I wanted to see a very simple tool, just maybe like an exit interview for every child that leaves the school system. No matter whether they go into independent schools or if they go into homeschooling or whatever happens to them, I think that's a big loss of information that's not being done today. So
I'd like to comment on the research that was posted on the VSB website. I did go through the list, and I know many of the folks who are listening have probably done research in their academic studies, and in preparation for designing studies, folks usually engage in doing a review of the literature. And one of the cautions that I always offer my graduate student is that one study does not produce generalizable results. One of the big...
I want to echo Lannie on this one. So Lannie, can I, hello?
Yes.
So I want to echo you on this, this argument. I do feel, I have this. I was very confused when I was going through that document. When I read, it's evidence-based, but evidence-based doesn't mean one research. It has to be meta-analysis together that this practice there's evidence of certain practice. But then the documents that we realized were based on a lot of single studies. So,
and that's where I was headed, is that,
right.
Even if we don't do a meta-analysis, I think, that at least collecting related studies, it is tricky. And my heart goes out to the people who were trying to summarize those studies. You never find a study that actually models your situation, the types of students you're working with, the neighborhoods they live in, the families they come from, the types of programs you want to offer. There are always variations on a theme. So the notion of finding individual studies that provide evidence for designing a feature of a program, not the whole program, but a feature of the program, relying on a single study is problematic. Looking at similar studies and deriving a synthesis of what it tells us, what the findings tell us, and the lingering questions. Unfortunately, nobody's done the studies we need here. They don't exist. So I don't encourage the VSB folks to spend a lot of time trying to track them down. The only study I've ever found looking at curriculum differentiation in the regular classroom is from 1997. It's American, and it said it's not happening. It's happening 20% of the time, and they were very generous with what they called differentiation, which included working with somebody else, calling that grouping. So it is a tough slog to try to claim that a program design is going to be research-based. Of the two options that are on the table right now, the gifted enrichment centers and the MACC programs like MACC, there's a good bit of research looking at full-time, homogeneous, self-contained classes for gifted kids. You can find that data and it supports them. So I don't want to leave the impression that I think that MACC is perfect the way it is. I think it's pretty clear that there are some issues that are potentially addressed in the proposal for the new program. But I also think that if those are problems with the current MACC program, that they can be addressed and the program might be able to continue in the current way with some a few changes, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. We're coming to an end. I'm just going to wrap up a little bit our part and say thank you so much to the panel. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the trustees for wanting to do this discussion and at least listen in. And I can understand if it was maybe hard to, I know there are a lot of emotions around this, so it can be hard to ask questions in this forum, but you know, if you want to reach out to anyone in the GCABC, we'd be happy to answer any questions you have. So sorry, Karen, did you want to say something?
Trustee Barb Parrott has a question.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you. I actually don't have a question. I want to make a comment. I was a teacher in the system in Vancouver in the late 80s when integration was happening. And I have to tell you that I am not a total believer in full integration. I don't believe that it works for all the kids all the time. Nevertheless, I want to say that the MACC program hasn't been canceled. Having said that, I understand the feelings of distrust, and so I understand why people are feeling that when I say that, people are going right. But from my point of view, the MACC classes have not been canceled, and I like the idea of. My problem is, as I've been thinking about this all along, I really don't know why this is coming up at this time. I don't know what has generated the discussion about a different process for gifted kids. I don't know why we want to talk about this now. I don't know why we want all this time at this particular time being devoted to this issue when we have teachers telling us, for example, that kindergarten and grade 1 students in particular are having a very difficult time as a result of the pandemic and the situations that have arisen as losses that are being felt as a result of the 2 years of the pandemic, and how are we going to address those particular needs. And there's so many things that we're seeing being affected right now. I'm not sure why we're throwing the child out with the bathwater. You know, I don't understand why this whole complex subject has come up. That's where I'm coming from as a trustee. I want to be talking about issues of major concern right now, and I'm not sure that this was one of them.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I think that's wonderful that you say that, because I think there is a sort of a distance, or like you describe a distrust based on that it was so fast and that there was no consultation with parents or community-based organizations like ours. We are a resource, we're here to help. And suddenly this is just presented, and there's some damage control to be done there, I think. I'm not totally sure how, but Barb, I really thank you for speaking to that, because I think the last 2 or 3 years have been super difficult for everyone in the province, especially parents and the young kids maybe. So I'm looking for some guidance here, because we are at the end of the panel discussion. Karen, I don't know if you want to maybe come on and want to sort of describe what we're doing now.
I guess I wanted to double check that the panelists didn't have, one last thing that they needed to get out that came up for them, just to make sure that those little threads that are left get heard. So if any of you have something you want to add. Yes, Dr.
I would really propose to have a more local evidence. So all the evidence that claimed on the literature were based elsewhere. And Vancouver has its own norm. We have a very different parental group. We have a very different student body. So we need to understand what has gone, what has done well in the past and what has gone wrong in the past. We have been doing this for 30 years. So we do need a study on what has been going on, rather than just say there's an issue, let's cancel that and then replace with something else that's also very simple-minded.
Thanks. That's very succinct.
Yeah. So Valentina has her hand raised. So if I imagine that if the trustees don't have more comments or questions, that they are free to leave. I think you're welcome to stay as well. And then if other people have questions, since we have a few experts in the room, and I think some of you have time to stay for a few more minutes, we can open it up for a few more questions then.
I just wanted to interject for just 1 second, and I just want to reiterate what Karen said about, feel free to, with the panelist permission, do feel free, trustees, to send this group questions. I mean, they are experts in their work, and I don't think there's any shame in asking those questions. I know that sometimes public meetings are a little bit uncomfortable in that way. So, I mean, I will have to admit that I think I don't have a gifted child myself, and so I feel like I've learned quite a lot, both from in speaking to parents, but also from this panel, right? So again, and I'm not a decision maker in this case, right? I mean, so I really, if I could say anything, please, there's no shame in asking questions. We have brought people here, for you. So thank you.
I would encourage the trustees, if they can manage the time, to visit a MACC class. I know your time is stretched very thin, but I find that in the MACC classes, I can see the 2016 curriculum alive and well. And I see its potential actualized in those classrooms. That is in large part due to those amazing teachers. So they understand the kids and they are achieving that optimal match. They're taking full advantage of the potential of the 2016 curriculum and working with it. It isn't pretty sometimes, and it's very chaotic, but that's how messy and wonderful learning is. And please take some time to spend some time there. It's unfortunate that we can't say the same thing for the enrichment centers. I know, the folks who design them, their heart is in the right place. I think there's still some thinking to do. And Owen was mentioning the need for research. I think, flying a trial balloon and asking people, would you send your child and having the kids respond too, would you be interested? It might help.
That's a good point also that you raised that question, because that's something that we can add to our parent survey that GCABC is coming up with as a theoretical experiment with this model. Would you put your kid in this model, just to sort of see what the acceptance, the general acceptance is of an idea like that? So Jessica Wang has her hand up, and then after that, I think it was Virginia, and then it's Vic.
Yes, hi. Hi, all the panelists. I just wanted to, first of all, say how what a great evening it was. I'm a parent of 2 gifted children, one of whom are in MACC class because she needed it. The other one is not, because he actually deals really well in the mainstream classroom. So it really, truly is, every child has, I like how it was said that they're on the not on the spectrum, they're scattered in the 3D model in the galaxy. It's just a wonderful analogy. But I wanted to point out is that, because I have actually sit through many of the VSB meetings as well as the workshops, and one of the very confusing concept that's being brought on is that the MACC program is actually not being canceled. It is being continued, but it is because the uniqueness of it being a multi-age clustered class, so that there are currently grade 4 to 7 students all combined in mixed age classrooms, which actually worked well for those gifted students, because they get to actually, be in not only a peer environment, but also be in in a diverse environment where the older kids who have gone through the programs for a couple years can actually be a leader and really help mentor the younger ones to transition. It was a wonderful program. It really works wonders. But that particular structure, I think, enables that confusion that it is still running, when in reality the VSB is basically closing intake like a year at a time. So this year they're shutting down grade 4, meaning they're only taking in grade 5, 6, 7 7 students, meaning and we haven't gotten any confirmation, but that would mean that they're cutting a class of grade 4, 5, because there's currently the grade 4, 5 class. But in practice would mean the class that was originally made of grade 4, 5, it will no longer be run, because you can't run the class with 12 students. And then the same thing goes with the French immersion class. Once the grade 4 students are gone, and the next would be, well, the next year they'll only be taking in grade 6, 7. So in that way, the VSB could say, oh, we are still taking, we're still having intake, and the program is continuing, when in reality it's not. It is being managed. It's being downsized. It's being phased out, and that's the truth behind it. But I'm not sure if the general public, if the parents, the prospective parents actually understands that, or even some of the trustees understand what this actually means for this group of students. Yeah, sorry for my long ranting.
But I think it's a very good point. And of course it's a cancellation. So let's call it for what it is. I think that's a very valid point. I think Vic now.
Oh, thank you. Lannie, when you said the staff, has their heart in the right place, I believe in that. And I think that the concept of the enrichment centers, I kind of remove the gifted out of the enrichment centers. So the concept of the enrichment centers is beautiful. There's going to be very high desire and want for it. So this is something that I think is a good thing for Vancouver, but it should not, of course, replace a special needs program, especially when one of the equity elements is equity of admission. And we went into it. Okay, so we're gonna have a 6-week topical program on video games and Minecraft. Well, I have 3 regular classroom kids. 2 of them like video games. They like Minecraft. They would probably say, hey, I want to go. Dad, can I go? I say, yeah, sure, go for it. So, the enrichment center concept is a good thing. If we got those kind of opportunities for kids, great. But let's not take away a special needs program for designated kids. I think that's really key. So I want to be a little solution focused here. And I don't know a lot about these challenge pullout, but wouldn't it be the solution to revision those so that that becomes enrichment centers? And that way you got both. You got enrichment centers and you still have a special needs program. And now, of course, it's going to come down to budget. But, I don't think these kind of things are extremely expensive because we're talking the delta between a full class and 21 kids is my understanding. So, calculate the cost out and figure it out. But, I think that's the way that a solution-based approach could work. So if anybody has a little bit more insight into whether the question here is, can these challenge pullout centers be revisioned into enrichment centers?
I don't know, what would one of the panelists, Lannie, did you want to comment on that?
Well, seeing as Vic mentioned my name, I'd like to. Vic, anytime you want, I love being solution focused too. And the idea of laying things out on a table and looking at the pros and cons, in addition to the financial aspects of it, who would and could be included, how do you arrange that, looking at the transitions. Anytime you want to do that, please call me. And I would love to work through that with you. And whoever else you feel needs to be included in that conversation, because that is delightfully solution focused. And those kinds of conversations are rich, and everybody learns a lot from them about what the VSB wants. And I'll play, walking library on research, or have my laptop with me and pull things up as we go to see what's out there. But I'm volunteering.
And then also please consider adding a technological perspective for Prince George and Kelowna that have nothing. So, it's like BC is wide, and this is a VSB lecture here, or a discussion here, but we don't collaborate about resources, and the ministry is sort of got a hands-off approach, saying this is up to the local school district. But with all the solutions we've seen during the pandemic, bringing people together online, I'm surprised that that isn't considered as something to evaluate, at least in BC, to also bring it out to a wider audience, because we have gifted kids in all over BC. So I think we sort of are coming to an end. Virginia has her hand up, so maybe Virginia comments, and then I think we should probably wrap it up. I start to see people are wiggling and getting tired. So, so Virginia, over to you.
Okay, this isn't a very lofty comment, but I think it's a practical one. One thing I observed in terms of making things more accessible, and they used to do this in the challenge centers years ago, but if they could just provide transportation again for the either MACC programs or some of the enrichment programs, because it is a big stumbling block for a lot of parents, that they can't get to these centers, they can't get to the programs. And I think if they ran that service, I know it costs a bit of money, but I think some parents would say this is doable. If my child can have some transportation there, it might be more accessible for more students.
Yeah, And then also maybe compromise, do every second time online and every second time in person. Like if it's a money issue, that there are opportunities. Jessica, we had said that we were wrapping up, but if you have a quick comment, we'll allow you to do that. And then I think after that, we're going to wrap up.
Yes, actually, just because speaking of budget, I just wanted to comment that apparently VSB has the budget to engage spur communication for this very comprehensive, like people involving. First of all, I'm actually not sure how much the VSB spent on that, but obviously they were willing to spend the resource in finding out. I mean, if
sorry, Lannie, can you put on mute? I think it's just an echo.
Yeah. So if like if they could do that, in a really engaging on an outside consultant and on the entire propaganda campaign, I mean, those money could easily be used to fund a couple of resource teachers part-time hour to run. And in fact, many of the gifted teachers are probably more than happy to be engaged in finding out solutions to enhance and expand the current challenge centers. I mean, there are many who have all their passion in teaching gifted kids, and many of them were not consulted or even allowed to speak. So
yeah, no, I think we've all understood the challenges in this process, and I just want to sort of celebrate. I see we have Spencer Eisen here from the Griffin's Nest, which is a Hamburg e-zine, and as a Hamburg parent, I'm so excited about seeing that in print. I thought it was an excellent piece, so congratulations on that, and for speaking your truth. I think that was wonderful. So with that, I think we're actually finished for today. We always have so much to talk about when it comes to our wonderful children. And I do invite you to come and visit some of the GCABC events if you have the need of networking, finding support, education. We're obviously not sure totally what's going to happen here. It looks a little bit grim, but we'll keep working at this. And from a GCABC perspective, we will at least continue monitoring and offering our support and services because that will be needed going into this new phase of inclusive education. So with that, I would like to thank the wonderful panel, my dear friends who I occasionally get together with and get to talk with about these interesting things about, and for Deepak for inviting us and setting this community up. I hope the trustees walked home with a little bit more of understanding how complicated this is and how complex. Sometimes easy solutions are bright and shiny, but they don't always work. So with that, I will finish up tonight and say thank you very much.